Greetings and salutations. Before we get into all this, this video has been brought to you by NordVPN. Thanks to NordVPN for sponsoring this 30-minute nightmare. It's September 14th, 2008. Scholastic Press Publishing has released the first installment in Suzanne Collins' sci-fi adventure trilogy, The Hunger Games. The book is partly inspired by the myth of Theseus and the Minotaur, in which children are sent as sacrifices into a labyrinth to be devoured by a bloodthirsty, you guessed it, Minotaur. This was done to stave off a plague that had befallen Athens. In the world of the Hunger Games, 2 children from 12 districts are sent to the capital, the wealthiest and most inaccessible part of the country, to be killed for the entertainment of rich people, as punishment to the districts for their uprising years earlier. The Hunger Games would get a lot of comparisons to the masterpiece Battle Royale, to the point that Collins' name would occasionally be eviscerated online for shits and giggles. But besides the initial concept, the stories are very different, and they're also both basically Theseus and the Minotaur and The 10th Victim, that Elio Petri film about something called The Big Hunt, a game show where spectators watch hunters kill prey. So whatever. When the first book was published, 50,000 copies were released, and that number continued to climb. Suffice it to say, it was very fucking popular. It's March 2009, a few months after the release of the first book, and the production company Color Force has acquired the rights to adapt the book into a film, and Lionsgate enters the deal with them. And this is where our story starts. The Hunger Games rollout happened pretty fast. The first book was released in 2008, and by 2015, just 7 years later, the last of the trilogy's movie adaptations had grossed over $600 million at the box office. The movie counterparts marked the beginning of a wave of YA dystopian novels adapted for the big screen. Right after this first installment, we'd get adaptations of Ender's Game, The Maze Runner, The Fifth Wave, and many more. Out of all of them, Hunger Games was the most competent and fulfilling series. But we're not there yet. We're here on April 4th, 2011. Lionsgate announces the official casting of 3 actors: Jennifer Lawrence as Katniss Everdeen, Josh Hutcherson, who publicly campaigned for his part as Peeta Mellark, and Liam Hemsworth as Gale Hawthorne. And fans are excited. No, I'm kidding. A lot of them are really mad. I am absolutely heartsick right now. Gary Ross and Nina Jacobson have completely ruined this amazing book with such horrible casting. Josh will never be my Peeta. What a disappointment. I have no enthusiasm for this movie at all anymore. This is the biggest fail since Charlie Sheen's Warlock tour. I will not support this doomed project. For God's sakes, Josh is terrible. Hunter Parrish's Peeta would be 1,000 times better. Terrible casting all around. None of them are right. What a disappointment. Oh my god, I hate this casting. Peeta and Gale's casting people should be switched. Peeta is a blonde buff guy, like the guy casted for Gale, and Gale is dark haired, like the guy cated for Peeta. I hope they're willing to get their hair dyed. Also, Katniss is supposed to have long dark hair, not medium-length blonde hair. And by the way, I think she looks way too old to play Katniss too. The casting is all wrong. Also, I heard some old guys playing Haymitch. No, Johnny Depp or someone like that is perfect for that role. Oh my god, this is all wrong. I hate it because I love this book. It's my favorite book ever. Jesus Christ. Casting has always sparked controversy among fandoms, whether it's people having ulcers over Robert Pattinson playing Edward Cullen, or people having ulcers over Robert Pattinson playing Batman. Casting is a thing that causes a lot of excitement. It should be said before I get into all the stuff that's about to unfold that generally fandoms are disdainful of all casting decisions. It is impossible to satisfy them. Josh Hutcherson is too brunette. He couldn't possibly dye his hair. What even is bleach? Did you make that up? Liam Hemsworth couldn't possibly play Gale. He's blonde. There's no such thing as hair dye. Stop lying to yourself. And Jennifer Lawrence, among other things, couldn't possibly play Katniss because she can't dye her hair and her ribcage isn't protruding. Ugh, this is all messed up. But eventually Josh grew on people. At the same time that he was announced as Peeta, I was honestly really excited because Josh was exactly who I envisioned Peeta looking like. Short and stocky with a friendly smile. Are you kidding me? Who else was it gonna be? Aww. No. More castings would be announced, and a few days later, on April 18th, 2011, characters Rue and Thresh would be cast by actors Amandla Stenberg and Dayo Okunigi. For the most part, the response was good. The publications that posted about the casting choices don't have comments on them, and the few that do have one or two comments are thankfully positive. A lot of fans seem to really like Amandla as Rue, and when you go to a video that Clever TV posted about the casting decision, many of the comments were people expressing sadness not because Amandla was cast, but because she was so cute, people didn't want to see her character die. Aww, Rue is so cute, which is even worse because now I'm gonna cry even more during her death scene. Great casting. Rue is so cute. She's even better than the Rue I imagined when I read the book. Why is Rue so cute? I'm gonna have to bring a lot of tissues to this movie. She looks like the perfect Rue. I hope she does the character justice. While it may seem as if there was no backlash until after the movie came out, which almost never happens, once upon a time these casting announcements were made on news sites and the posts were flooded with outrage. Since those comments, and well, all comments, have since been removed, the full scope of anger is missing from history. But you can still find a few comments on YouTube videos that included the announcement, and even on those old fan cast videos. Going back to look at those Dreamcast, I found that more often than not, a white actress was chosen for Rue, and the rare videos that included a black actress for the role would get comments like these. I also imagined Rue as white, thus her resembling Prem. I think that's why it was confusing. Rue was supposed to have olive skin. Olive. I'm sure this was just done for political correctness. Ugh, that's Rue? I'm sorry, but she doesn't seem like Rue. I thought Rue would have lighter hair. Dude, I think it's perfect. Not what I thought Thresh would look like, but still, I imagined a big buff white dude as him. The boy tribute from District 11, Thresh, has the same dark skin as Rue. But the resemblance stops there. They were in the minority and their racism went unseen by the mainstream. It wasn't until after the movie was released on March 23rd, 2011 that Twitter started to do what Twitter does. The difference between the disappointment surrounding Josh Hutcherson and Liam Hemsworth is that A, people weren't being racist, and B, no one took screenshots. To all my Hunger Games readers out there, did anyone picture Rue as being black? No offense or anything, but I just didn't see her like it. And for the record, I'm still pissed that Rue is black. Like, you think she might have mentioned that? Is that just me, or how in the world are they going to make Rue a freaking black bitch in the movie? LOL, not to be racist, but I'm angry now. Awkward moment when Rue is some black girl and not the little blonde innocent girl you picture. Some ugly little girl with nappy ad hair. Pissed me off. She was supposed to be cute and at least remind her of Prim. Why did the producers make all the good characters black? SMH. Cinna and Rue weren't supposed to be black. All in favor of having me redirect Hunger Games? They weren't. The producers screwed it all up. Ugh. Why does Rue have to be black? Not gonna lie, kinda ruined the movie. Okay, call me racist, but when I found out Rue was black, her death wasn't as sad. Ew, Rue is black? I'm not watching. Since when has Rue been... Amandla Stenberg was 12 years old, by the way. The thing is, Rue and Thresh were described as being black in the book. Or, okay, if you want to get technical about it, they were described as having dark brown skin. And I know that the Hunger Games thing with District 11 is very messy stuff. I might handle that in a different video altogether because there's so much to unpack there. The only other character cast with a black actor whose skin wasn't described as being brown or any other color for that matter was Cinna. But if you're complaining about Lenny Kravitz being cast in a movie, that sounds like a you problem. As in a you have no taste problem. Why is Cinna black? There's been a long-standing history in Hollywood to replace characters of color with white characters, or to keep the characters' race the same but have those characters still played by white actors. In recent years, we've seen this most frequently with American live-action anime adaptations, changing Light Yagami to Light Turner, casting Justin Chatwin as Goku, and a tree playing Mitoko Kusanagi. And that's just the newer stuff, because this dates back decades. The list is exhaustive. The movie Hood, for which leading actress Patricia Neal won an Oscar, in the book this character was originally black. This was changed because the producers didn't think it was possible for a black woman to be so desired. In Pay It Forward, Kevin Spacey's character was, in the book, a black man. In the adaptation process, it was decided that he wasn't anymore. And in Warm Bodies, the character played by Annalie Tipton was described in the book as being half Ethiopian, but I guess that didn't work for the story, and literally no one who read Warm Bodies pre-film adaptation seemed to mind. Although Lavender Brown, a character in the Harry Potter series, was never described as any particular race or color, she was initially cast in the movies with black actresses, twice. But when it came time for Lavender to have a speaking part and to play a more important role in the story, she was replaced with a white actress. While a lot of fans did have gripes with this installment in the film franchise, none of those qualms had anything to do with Lavender suddenly being white. It's likely that no one noticed, and it's just as likely that anyone who did notice simply didn't care. So characters like Rue and Thresh, if they had been cast with white actors, would have been far from the first characters in the history of cinema to be whitewashed. The sad thing is that if they had been whitewashed, the fans wouldn't even have noticed, because clearly few of them, despite being such huge fans of the Hunger Games series, seemed to pick up on the key descriptions of the characters to begin with. She's the 12-year-old, the one who reminded me so of Prim in stature. Up close, she looks about 10. She has bright, dark eyes and satiny brown skin. My guess is that the Einsteins who read the book lacked reading comprehension skills and dismissed the first part in favor of the second part, where Katniss says Rue reminds her of Prim because of her size and demeanor. So Rue was always a black character, and it was one of the few and first times that such a character was cast with an actor who somewhat matches the description, because colorism. Put a pin in that. But despite these characters and the color of their skin literally being described more than once, a section of Hunger Games fans were still unreasonably surprised, because white fans in particular are very used to being the only kind of people who exist in their favorite books, and this is especially true with science fiction and fantasy novels. Western literature in general tends to center white writers, and in doing so, centers whiteness. How many times have you found yourself reading a book and noticing when an author describes a character as being black or Asian or Hispanic? It feels sudden, not only because this is the first character of color you've come across in the book, but because no other characters have had their race or skin color described. And you realize, oh, they don't need the description because they are understood to be white. This technique makes whiteness the standard, the default, and it effectively others anything that isn't that. In 2012, one of my all-time favorite writers, Zadie Smith, released her fourth novel, N.W. It follows 4 different characters, and it's a pretty experimental book, with some passages being written in third person, others in first person, and varying narrative techniques. But my favorite element about the novel is that Smith doesn't describe the race of any character unless they're white, effectively subverting what has become an accepted norm in Western literature of whiteness being the neutral, or default. When asked about her decision to do this, Smith said, "I grew up reading a generation of American and English people, like Bellow, Updike, or Amos. Everybody's neutral unless they're black. Then you hear about it. The black man, the black woman, the black person. Of course, if you happen to be black, the world doesn't look that way to you. I just wanted to try and create perhaps a sense of alienation and otherness in this person, the white reader, to remind them that they are not neutral to other people." That same year that the first Hunger Games film was released, casting choices for the film adaptation of Cassandra Clare's novel, The Mortal Instruments, City of Bones, was announced. In July, news broke that the late and great actor Godfrey Gao was going to play Magnus Bane. Again, most fans were happy with this casting, but there were others who were extremely upset that an Asian character was being played by an Asian actor. No, why? What the fuck? It gives me another reason to reread the books and not watch the films. Since when is Magnus Chinese? Nope. I don't think that is Magnus. Whenever I think of Magnus, I think of Adam Lambert. What is y'all's thing with Adam Lambert? Can we please stop? If Adam can act or not, that is how I pictured Magnus. Not as an Asian dude. I just think the casting for this movie in general so far has been terrible. No way. Horrible choice for Magnus. Too young. And when did they say Magnus was Asian? Must have missed that part. You did! On Tumblr, Cassandra Clare was asked by a fan if she could please explain to her racist fans why an Asian actor was going to play an Asian character, because there seemed to be a lot of confusion on Facebook. Cassandra Clare said, "I am confused about the confusion. They want an Asian actor to play Magnus because Magnus is Asian." She went on to show sections of what she'd written in the book, lines that clearly point out Magnus is half Indonesian and speaks Indonesian a few times. She couldn't have made it any clearer that Magnus was not white, or not only white. I remember being told early on in the whole movie process, before I sold the rights, that I should be wary about having written a biracial character, because if there is any excuse to cast a character as white, even if they are not, even if they are only half, Hollywood will take it. The general assumption that is always made about characters is that they are white. I am constantly asked if Jim is Chinese even though he's from Shanghai and speaks Mandarin and says he is Chinese and is portrayed on the cover of the book by a half-Chinese model. Apparently the idea he might not be white is just that startling. And why is that startling? Because of things like whitewashing. Because if mainstream media can take an opportunity to accord more privilege to the already privileged and make everybody white, by and large, they will. And every time it happens, it contributes to the problem and makes sure the problem lasts longer. So why are they casting Asian actors for Magnus? Because Magnus is Asian. And as someone who has watched City of Bones, Mortal Instruments, can I just say, Godfrey Gao is easily the best thing about that movie. He was on screen for like 10 minutes, and for those glorious 10 minutes, I forgot what a horrible movie I was watching. Thank you for saving it, Godfrey. We love you, and we miss you like crazy. For centuries, art has featured white people as the primary subjects. Whiteness is considered by many to be the default. Studios don't question whether a teenage black girl will be able to relate to a story about a teenage white girl. It's not even really considered. They ask if white girls will be able to relate to black girls, and then they decide they can't, which ends in black girls getting little to no lighthearted stories about high school or coming of age. The reason often given for these decisions is that white people are incapable of relating to characters that aren't white, which sounds like a load of shit, given Hollywood's history of telling stories about black, Asian, and indigenous characters while having white actors play them. The popularity of the story of Othello, the popularity of movies like The Conqueror, the infamous film about Genghis Khan where he's played by John Wayne, are testaments to the truth that white audiences have always been interested in stories about people of a different race and culture. Perhaps the distinction is that they've always been more comfortable with white actors playing these roles. With the exception of Ira Aldrich, it was the norm for white actors to play Othello. In fact, the first instance of a black actor, Lawrence Fishburne, playing Othello in a mainstream studio film wouldn't be until 1995. So even when characters are explicitly described as being black or Asian, you'll still have white audience members who ask if that's really their race and if it actually matters. Some people are so used to whiteness being the default, they view it as the norm, and any deviation from that norm is looked at with suspicion. Every time there's been a case of whitewashing in anime, for instance, and people of color are rightfully upset about having an opportunity taken from them, there's always a counter defense from white audience members. It gets to a point that they'll claim characters with Japanese names who live in Japan and speak Japanese are actually white, and that anyone who watches anime would be able to see that. Then at the same time, they say that race shouldn't matter at all unless it's pertinent to the story. And if a black character is leading a film where the theme isn't centered around their race, people will get upset and claim the character's only black because of political correctness. Because people who aren't white only exist because of political correctness, and not because we were born into the world like everyone else. The whole thing with only casting people of color if their race is important to the story is how we get so many movies and books about how hard it is to be a person of color. We get stories with a mostly black cast where it's almost all about black trauma and black pain, because even though our experiences with race will never disengage from our everyday life, stories about black people just existing without their race being the main focus is seen as an unnecessary result of PC culture. After scouring social media to see if I could find more reactions to the Rue situation around that time period, I found one who read The Hunger Games and did see that description of Rue, and they straight up admitted that although they saw that the character had dark brown skin, they just kind of assumed Suzanne Collins meant olive skin, that Rue was Sicilian or something. And you know, I guess that's valid, but I feel like if Suzanne Collins wanted to write that Rue had an olive skin tone, she would have just written that Rue had an olive skin tone. You know, kind of like she did with Katniss and Gale. I watch as Gale pulls out his knife and slices the bread. He could be my brother. Straight black hair, olive skin. We even have the same gray eyes. Don't know how one
Substitute.
olive to dark brown, but okay. Most of the outrage we see with casting choices today come with the news of actors of color playing traditionally white characters, which makes this case so bizarre because apart from writing that Rue was black every other sentence, I'm not sure how Suzanne Collins could have made it more obvious that she was black. For that piece of information, though, some people just refused to acknowledge it. When all the racist attacks were going on, there was one YouTube commenter who summed up their reactions pretty well. LMFAO, I imagine when everyone was reading the book and Katniss was describing Rue being brown skin, they must have been thinking, nah, gotta be a typo. Nah. The racist reactions to a black character being played by a black actress was obviously unwarranted and incredibly fucking stupid. Authors were panicking about how their readers were perceiving their obviously black-coded characters. Teachers across the country were scrambling to reintroduce basic reading comprehension skills into their curriculum. Guys, it was cataclysmic. And the thing is, at the end of the day, although a black actress was chosen for the part, the casting directors still got it wrong. Let's return to the descriptions of Rue, shall we? She's the 12-year-old, the one that reminded me so of Prim in stature. Up close, she looks about 10. She has bright, dark eyes and satiny brown skin. She has dark brown skin. Yes, Rue is a dark-skinned black girl. The racism toward her character didn't begin, nor did it end with Amandla Stenberg being in the movie. It began in the casting room, where the decision was made to cast a light-skinned biracial actress for the role. And you know, props to Amandla because I do think she brought Rue to life beautifully, but that doesn't change the fact that her casting was yet another instance of a dark-skinned actress being erased from a film. On one hand, the filmmakers did a disservice to Rue by casting her this way, and on the other, I know that had she been a little dark-skinned girl, the vitriol and racism the actress received would have been 10 times worse. One of the tweets that popped up read, "When I found out Rue was black, her death wasn't as sad." Comments like these were just the tip of the iceberg of a larger issue. The issue being that black girls are perceived to be less innocent than white girls, and that dark-skinned black girls are perceived to be less innocent than light-skinned black girls. There's an actual study confirming this, and I recommend everyone reading it. Girlhood Interrupted, The Erasure of Black Girls' Childhood, focuses on the adultification of young black girls and how, as early as 5 years old, they're perceived to be older and less innocent and more culpable. Across all age ranges, participants viewed black girls collectively as more adult than white girls. Responses revealed in particular that participants perceived black girls as needing less protection and nurturing than white girls, and that black girls were perceived to know more about adult topics and are more knowledgeable about sex than their white peers. Beginning as early as 5 years of age, black girls were more likely to be viewed as behaving and seeming older than their stated age, more knowledgeable about adult topics, including sex, and more likely to take on adult roles and responsibilities than what would have been expected for their age. In 2013, Quvenzhané Wallis became the youngest person to be nominated for a Best Actress in a Leading Role at the Academy Awards. Leading up to this and following it, she was constantly ridiculed by the media. Her name was mocked. She became a punching bag for certain celebrities and news outlets. The Onion made a headline calling her a cunt at 9 years old. Why, you might be wondering, did such a thing happen to other super young nominees, like Anna Paquin for instance? No, this little black girl, for some reason, was perceived by many to be a grown woman.
Had you watched Annie as a little girl?
When I heard that they were doing, well, I'm still a little girl.
Those of lighter skin are awarded social and economic privileges because of their closer phenotypic resemblance to whites and their assumed superior social value relative to their darker skinned counterparts. And here's how that translates into Hollywood. That racial empathy gap makes them believe it is impossible for white audiences to be able to relate to anyone who's black, and especially to anyone who is dark skinned. So if they have to cast a black girl as a lead in a movie, more often than not they will cast a light-skinned actress because they are perceived to be, quote, white adjacent. The hate you give. But I remember being very upset when Amandla Stenberg was cast in the role of Star Carter, because Star is a dark-skinned girl. You see that in the descriptions of herself and in the descriptions of her mother and Uncle Carlos, where she singles them out as having light skin. You see it on the fucking cover of the book. Yet this is who they cast. Scholars have noted that skin complexion is more consequential for black women's lives than black men's. Intersectionality theory provides a lens through which we can understand how light skin affords special advantages and opportunities to African American women in ways that it does not for men. Hence, Thresh is allowed to be played by a dark-skinned actor and Rue is not. For a lot of filmmakers, biracial is the default for blackness. This is most evident with Netflix originals, where any and all black girl characters are as light or lighter than a paper bag. And again, most of the time, this is with women, because when you see black male actors on screen, a lot of the time they are allowed to be dark-skinned. They are allowed to have black features, and it's not made a big deal out of. You see this dichotomy with the casting of Thresh and Rue, respectively. Thresh is described in the book as having the same dark brown skin as Rue. For the movie, Thresh was permitted to be played by an actor matching this description, while Rue was lightened for the appeasement of white audiences. Funnily enough, one of the few times in YA film adaptations that a biracial actor was cast as a biracial character was for the film Everything, Everything. And they still got it wrong. Maddie in Everything is half black and half Japanese, but again, Amandla Stenberg was given the part, even though she is not Asian. How do you guys keep getting this wrong? It's a good time to talk about Thresh. While there was some upset about Thresh being black, you might have noticed that a lot of the vitriol was directed towards Rue, towards Amandla. As a character, Thresh keeps to himself, keeps quiet, and is known for his huge stature that sees him towering over everyone. It appeared to be more palatable to white fans to see a black man playing such a role. It's evident that a good portion of the vitriolic response to Rue's surprise blackness was that people, the racist, literally could not compute with the idea of Rue being this sweet, innocent little girl and also being black. Katniss constantly compares Rue to her sister Primrose. They both share flower names, they're both 12 years old, they share the same small stature and the same big eyes and the same innocence, and Katniss wants to do everything she can to protect them both. Every time Rue is described, Katniss makes a note of her tiny figure. She's so young and so tiny and so sweet. Rue, who is dressed in a gossamer gown complete with wings, flutters her way to Caesar. A hush falls over the crowd at the sight of this magical wisp of a tribute. Caesar's very sweet with her, complimenting her 7 in training, an excellent score for one so small. Some readers were wholly incapable of holding the fact that she was black along with the fact that she was so innocent. For certain readers, it could only be one or the other. Perhaps most disheartening is the defense that came to these young, prejudiced, and frankly stupid people. When they were rightfully called out for being racist, the defense was, no, these kids aren't racist. They're using racial slurs and implying that black lives don't matter as much as white lives, but they're not being racist. Where'd you get that from? And it's like, dude, just call it what it is. This one person on Reddit made a fantastic point about bigoted readers and writers. I create my picture of them based on their personality. That's exactly the problem though. Even making your own picture, you default it to light skin, blonde hair, and blue eyes for no reason at all. It's good that you don't rage about it like these people in the article, but the deep-seated white bias so prevalent in society is what's really disheartening and kind of fucked up about it all. And they were downvoted.
Why you booing me? I'm right.
And that's how you get people screaming that Rue can't be black. And now that she is suddenly black, her race detracts from her innocence. And now that she is suddenly black, they can't feel any sadness about her death. There are people who have argued that the kids who tweeted those racist things weren't racist and meant no harm, that they were just surprised. You don't need me to tell you that surprised people don't just drop racist ideologies and slurs when they're surprised. And if they do, it's because they're racist. Some of the blame for this incident fell on the shoulders of Suzanne Collins. The fans who were called out for their tweets defended themselves by saying they thought dark/satiny brown skin meant olive skin, and some insisted that it was easy to overlook the description because it was, quote, too brief. As someone who has read all of 3 books in my lifetime, Slaughterhouse-Five, Hunger Games, and What Would Keanu Do, I feel safe in saying that most physical descriptions of characters are short and sweet. The ones that aren't are either Wattpad fiction or they are Moby Dick. no in between. For the sake of this excuse though, I decided to reread The Hunger Games to determine how many descriptions there are of, say, Peeta's blonde hair, because that had a lot of people fired up, right? I am absolutely heartsick right now. So I read the book, and by the way, I did restrict it to just book 1 because, I mean, Rue only appears in book 1, so I thought it'd be fair to just do the first one. Maybe that doesn't make sense, I don't know. And anyway, that description of Peeta having blonde hair, it shows up twice. Do you know what else showed up twice? I watch him as he makes his way toward the stage. Medium height, stocky build, ashy blonde hair that falls in waves over his forehead. As I carefully replaced the lid and backed away, I noticed him, a boy with blonde hair, peering out from behind his mother's back. Okay, then, I thought, alright, well, how many times did they describe Katniss, for instance, as having dark brown hair and olive-toned skin? Because that's something that a lot of people seem to remember, because they point it out all the fucking time. And would you believe it, this vague and brief description shows up once. So Suzanne Collins established that Peeta had blonde hair twice. She established that Gale and Katniss had olive-toned skin and dark hair once. And she established that Katniss's mother and her sister Primrose had light eyes and light hair twice, and that is something everyone seems to remember. But the fact that Rue and Thresh have dark brown skin, which was established twice and once respectively, technically 3 times if we're counting the time it described Thresh because it was used to describe Rue as well, or whatever, no one could remember that. Why is that? No, it's a rhetorical question. It's the racism. There's really no happy ending here. There's no moral. There's no way to tie it all up in a pretty bow. It's just racism, and racism tends to have no rhyme or reason. All you can say is that this happened and it was awful, and that's it. The question often posed in the light of this whole thing was, well, where does it say these characters are black? And to be completely fair, the characters of Rue and Thresh, as they are described, aren't necessarily black. They were confirmed to be black from Suzanne Collins, but they could have been Indian, for instance. What we know for sure, regardless, is that they are definitely not white. The choice to base character descriptions on skin color alone and not race means quite a few characters' races become open to interpretation. So, ironically, because of that decision to make whiteness neutral and the default, to make it the standard that goes unsaid, I could ask the same question. Where does it say these characters are white? Listen, by now you definitely know what a VPN is. You're just being stubborn. You know what a VPN is, you know NordVPN is the best one out there, you know about its double data encryption, split tunneling. You know you can use it on multiple devices, secure internet, you know all of that stuff. And if you don't know, frankly, I'm surprised you survived this long. Tell me your secrets because I'm dying out here. And yet you still don't have it, but it's okay. I'm here to present you with another opportunity. Here's how you're gonna get in on this, alright? Go to nordvpn.com/Yara, that is YHARA. I know you can see it spelled because it's the channel name, it's like right under this, but I just have to be sure sometimes. Or you can use the code YARA, I'm not gonna spell it again, to get a 2-year plan with a huge discount plus 1 additional month free. If that sounds awesome to you, if you like being safe when you're navigating the internet, because I know it's what you do most of the time, I don't think you're reading, then take advantage of this great opportunity by going to nordvpn.com/Yara. I'm not spelling it again.